Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, just snowslicers, peasants, vassals, gas huffers. I'm a useful idiot. Today I want to talk about a whole bunch of stories that are coming out about chemical weapons in Syria, and specifically sarin. And sarin is the same weaponized gas that's showing up everywhere. And let's get to the top story first, and that's the fact that France and Britain have both turned in the results of studies they've done on samples that were smuggled out of Syria. And first of all, France confirmed sarin gas was used multiple times in a localized way in Syria, including at least once by the regime. And there's something interesting about that statement, and I'll get back to it. Then Britain also said that its tests were also positive for sarin. And then the United Nations team also announced small-scale use of toxins or chemicals in at least 4 attacks in March and April. So we have all these Western European United Nations sources all confirming that gas was used. But let me get back to this statement by France. It confirmed that sarin gas was used multiple times in a localized way. So they're talking about small doses scattered about in different scenarios, including at least once by the regime. So that puzzles me. So they're saying that gas was used multiple times and possibly once by the government. So that implies that most of the gas use has been by the opposition, which is what the UN report said a few weeks back. And but interestingly enough, the French foreign minister went on to say that there was no doubt that in at least one case, the regime was responsible for the attack. So he reiterates the fact that they found multiple uses of sarin in Syria and maybe one case of it being used by the Assad government. But then he goes on to say a line has been crossed and all options are on the table, including intervening militarily where the gas is produced or stored. So even though their evidence seems to substantiate the fact that it's the opposition that's using most of the gas, they're still saying this red line's being crossed and these weapons need to be destroyed. So an interesting turn of events, and it also ties in with these 3 other stories. First of all, the Syrian government has claimed now that they've found opposition members in the city of Hama with 2 cylinders of sarin gas. And I realize that just as propaganda is going to come from Western media, the Syrian media is also going to have propaganda. So somewhere in between, the truth lies. And then turns out Turkey found a 2-kilogram cylinder of sarin gas in homes of suspected Syrian Islamists, members of the Al-Nusra Front, who were aligned with Al-Qaeda. And that was on May 30th. They found that in Turkey. And 12 terrorists were rounded up, as well as a cache of weapons. So, and then the third story coming from Syria was back in March. Syria said that at Aleppo, sarin gas was deployed and 26 people were killed, including Syrian soldiers, and that this might have even been fired from Turkey. And they invited the UN to come and investigate that, but the UN declined. But now it's also confirmed by the French and British reports that sarin gas was indeed used at Aleppo. And since the target was Syrian civilians and Syrian soldiers, one has to assume the Syrian government in that case was telling the truth, that the opposition was using sarin. So interesting. We have all these confirmations now that the opposition primarily is using sarin. And not only that, the French report points out that the fact that it's used in a localized way. And I'm going to speculate here a little bit, and that's the fact that, first of all, as I've stated in other videos, I don't really think Syria, considering the threats that's been made to it, would use any sort of chemical weapons, particularly since they're winning in the field for the most part. And I just don't see them using chemical weapons because it would easily justify an intervention they do not want. On the other hand, the fact that, let me take that one step further. If the government was to use chemical weapons, I would assume they'd use them on a large scale because they can and they have the will. So if they're going to use them at all, why would they use small amounts? Why not just use large amounts? And you can suggest that, well, maybe they think they can hide it if they don't use it as much, but that's kind of a stretch. But the more likely scenario, and the simplest answer in this case is probably the truth, is the fact that since it's used localized in small ways, in small doses, in easy-to-carry canisters, it seems like, for the most part, it is the opposition using it. All the reports point out this. All the characteristics of the use of sarin all point to the opposition and not the government. And it doesn't really change the outcome. It seems to me that regardless of who uses chemical weapons in Syria, they could easily use it to justify intervention. If nothing else, if they're falling into the hands of terrorists and Syrian opposition, then that means there's chemical weapons floating around Syria, and that will justify going in and making strikes to destroy all the chemical weapons depots in Syria. But let's look at the facts again. So we find that the opposition in Hama had sarin cylinders, and then we find out that in Turkey, now that's where it gets interesting. If they're finding Al-Qaeda in Turkey with sarin gas before they enter back into Syria, that means an outside party is supplying them with this sarin. They're probably not getting it from the government. Why would they smuggle it out of the country only to smuggle it back in? So it seems to me that an outside party is supplying this sarin gas to be used in Syria to provoke an intervention. And who better to do that than the opposition? And so anyway, all this talk about keeping chemical weapons out of the hands of terrorists seems to be undermined now, considering an outside third party is now supplying terrorists with chemical weapons. So there we have it. Interesting development, and we'll have to see where this leads and see if there's any more events involving chemical weapons and sarin. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.